Good day, everyone. Today's lecture is about writing publishable paper. My name is Lashen Kaluza, and I will be your professor in this lecture. I am teaching at LNU, the graduate school level. At the end of this lecture, you'll be able to understand the concepts of writing publishable paper. Second, you'll be able to conceptualize a research paper, and finally, organize and write a research paper. So let's start with the research title. The research title summarizes the main idea or ideas of your study. A good title contains the fewest possible words that adequately describe the contents and/or purpose of your research paper. So in other words, when you are going to write a title, make sure that you have the fewest possible words that basically describe the entire research that you're going to talk about. There are some researchers that a research title may have only at most 14 words. Here are some effective titles or writing titles in academic research papers which have the following characteristics. First, we have to indicate accurately the subject and scope of the study. We have also to avoid using abbreviations because, as we all know, your readers may do not know what we mean about those abbreviated terms. Use words that create a positive impression and stimulate reader interest. Also, use current nomenclature from the field of study. It may reveal how the paper will be organized. You have also to identify key variables, both dependent and independent. This is for quantitative studies only, and also suggest a relationship between variables which supports the major hypothesis. And this is also for quantitative studies. Also, please limit your titles, the words of in your title to about like 10 to 15 words only. Okay, do not include study of and analysis of or similar constructions because, as we all know, doing research is of course studying and at the same time analyzing. Okay, so titles are usually in the form of a phrase but can also be in a form of a question. Use correct grammar and capitalization with all first words and last words, capitalized including the first word of a subtitle. All nouns, pronouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs that appear between the first and the last words of the title are also capitalized. In academic papers, rarely is a title followed by an exclamation mark. However, a title or subtitle can be in the form of a question. So, abstract allows you to elaborate upon each major aspect of the paper and helps readers decide whether they want to read the rest of the paper. So therefore, enough key information such as summarized results, observations, trends, and among others must be included to make the abstract useful to someone who may want to reference your work. Always remember that the window to your research is your abstract, and therefore it should give your abstract should provide a concise or a summary of the entire paper. And later on, we will talk about the parts of writing paragraphs. Abstracts. So these are some points to remember when you are writing abstract. First, start with the motivation statement, or maybe the problem statement, or the thesis statement of your research, the main argument of conducting your research. Second is theories and methods. There are some journals, scientific papers, or journals that basically they mention uh, the theories that are or is used in the research, okay, in connection to the motivation or the problem statement or the thesis statement. And also, Okay, the methods. Methods is very, very important in the paragraphs. Okay, so you have to write in details about the things that you have, the process that you have performed in your research. Okay, and then also the highlight the significant results in relation to the problem or thesis statement or the motivation that you have mentioned in the first few sentences. And finally, you have to write the conclusion. Okay, and then recommendation basically is optional, and make sure that in writing abstract you should have only about like 200 maximum words. Okay, and finally you have to identify at least 5 keywords describing your research. Do not mention already those words that are written in your title. So how do we write an introduction? Take note that introduction should answer the questions why, or why you choose that topic for research, why it is important, why you adopted a particular method or approach, and so on and so forth. You can also think of the introduction as the section that points out the gaps in knowledge that the rest of the paper will fill, okay? Or the section in which you define and claim your territory within the broad area of research. That is the main goal of why we are writing introduction. All right. So how do we write our introduction? First, you have to begin your introduction by providing a concise background account of the problem studied and at the same time the thesis statement. So based on the background of the problem being studied, then you are going to conclude about your thesis statement. What is now your main argument? Why are you conducting this research? Right? So also for number 2, state the objective of the investigation or your study. Your research objective is the most important part of the study or of your introduction. Establish the significance of your work. Why was there a need to conduct the study? So these are things that you're going to consider. Introduce the reader to the pertinent literature. Do not give a full history of the topic. Only quote some previous work having direct bearing on the present problem. Take note that quoting or citing literatures, you have to emphasize the gaps that are mentioned in the literature. You may get the weaknesses, or you can get the strength, for example, the issues of that literature. If you are doing a trend analysis, then you have to look into what happened from the previous to the present in relation to your study. Okay. Fifth, clearly state your hypothesis if this is for quantitative research, the variables investigated, and concisely summarize the methods used in that particular study. Okay, define any abbreviation or specialized terms before using the abbreviated terms. You define it in the introduction before you use it in the succeeding paragraphs, the abbreviated terms. Seventh, we have provide a concise discussion of the results and findings of the studies or literatures you have cited so the readers understand the big picture about your study, the complexity of your study, the need to conduct the study. Describe some of the major findings presented in your manuscript and try to explain also how they contribute to the larger field of research. Okay? State the principal conclusion derived from your results or from the results of other findings of other researches. Identify any questions left unanswered and any new questions generated by your literatures or the study that you are citing. Okay. Other points to consider, be aware of who will be reading your manuscript and make sure the introduction is directed to that particular audience. Move from from general rather to specific. Meaning to say from the problem in the real world to the literature to your study or to your research. Write in the present tense except for what you did or found, which should be in the past tense, which is basically written in the results and discussions. Take note that be concise in explaining because you have a very limited space in writing your introduction. The main point of writing your introduction is basically why you are conducting your research, okay? What is your basic purpose, okay? And your argument, and at the same time, you have to identify two gaps: the gap of knowledge and the gap of information. When we say the gap of knowledge, these are informations that you can find in the body of knowledge. Meaning to say, these are published in scientific papers. Do not get informations or cite informations coming from news, from magazines, from Wikipedias, right, and the like. Because remember, you are writing a scientific paper. So therefore, it is a must that you are going to cite those of with reputable informations, basically from books, okay, and from scientific papers such as journals or scientific journals. So important points to remember in your writing a paragraph. Start your paragraph with a topic or a problem or a gap. Okay, support your topic or problem or gap with at least 5 literature emphasizing the gaps. And finally, write a synthesis. Take note that in writing the introduction, each paragraph stands on its own unless otherwise the next paragraph has something to do with the previous paragraph. But you have to clearly define the topic, problem, or gap in reference to the previous paragraph. But the literature's there is there. I mean complete. Okay, to have at least 5 literatures emphasizing the gaps, the trends of analysis, or the weaknesses of those researches in relation to the study that you are conducting or the gaps that you have mentioned in that particular paragraph. Don't forget to synthesize. All right. So for the framework of the study, there are two kinds there. We have the conceptual framework and the theoretical framework. A conceptual framework is not merely a collection of concepts, but rather a construct in which each concept plays an integral role. Basically, conceptual framework is a graphical representations of the variables and concepts that you have mentioned in the previous readings, from the literature reviews they've conducted and from the literatures that you have cited in your introductions. How these variables relate to one another, and the basis of that basically is your explanations in the research conducted in the literature reviews that you have mentioned in the introduction and the lit reviews that you have conducted. And so therefore, it should also be connected with a theory, which is found now in the theoretical framework. A theoretical framework is a collection of interrelated concepts like a theory, but not necessarily so well worked out. A theoretical framework guides your research, determining what things you will measure and what statistical relationship you will look for. So this is your guide. Okay, this is your basis. This is your framework for you to be able to justify. Okay, the if these theories are accepted or not, if the theories I've conducted before is really still be used. If not, then you have to look for another theory that will fit in your study. Remember that when you're conducting a quantitative research, both theoretical framework and conceptual framework should be present because the connections of the two is there. Okay, quantitative research basically needs you to measure something. That's why your conceptual framework is present. But in qualitative research, there is no, take note that in qualitative research, there is no variables that needs to be measured. In other words, we are only going to use theoretical framework for a qualitative research studies. So, how do we write research questions? Apart from writing statement of the problem, you're going to write the research questions. These are very specific in writing your research, okay? So this is a question that you will answer through your research and in your project or presentations or research paper, okay? For example, um, What in quantitative research, for example, what is the level of satisfaction of the students in using ICT-based teaching materials, right? For qualitative research, you may say, what are the emerging themes viewed or expressed by the participants in using ICT-based teaching materials? All right. So these are different because the first one is based on quantitative, the other one is based on qualitative research. And if you'll notice that the first one, if you are going to get the data, it will be close-ended type of questions in the survey. While in the qualitative research, you will get the themes based on observations or interviews that you're going to conduct, and that you will be using open-ended questions. All right, so steps to help formulate your research questions. Write down what you know and what you do not know about the topic. That's very, very important. Write down also the who or person, the what or event, the when or the time, the where, the place in regards to the topics. Now, format your question. The question should be proving question and start with what, how, does, are, is, etc. Avoid using yes or no questions because basically these questions are close-ended and it should be reflected only in the survey questionnaire. Your questions should not leave open questions of who, what, when, or where. All right, let's go to the methodology. Suggested format for qualitative research are the following. We have the research design, meaning, and then you are going to mention the design of your research, and you are going to support your research design with literature stating the appropriateness of the design in your study. Why is it that this design fits in your study? Okay, take note for qualitative research, we have different types of designs. Well, we have the phenomenology, case study, narrative inquiry, grounded theory, ethnography, auto methodology, and then we have also photo voice. Okay, so each of those have different types. Just like, for example, if you're going to conduct a phenomenological study, then there are different kinds of phenomenology. We have the descriptive phenomenology or the Husserlian phenomenology. Then we have the transcendental phenomenology of Mustakas, and then we have the interpretative phenomenology, and finally we have the hermeneutics phenomenology. The same thing for a case studies. Okay, so we have different kinds of case studies. We have single case studies, embedded single case studies, we have multiple case studies, and embedded multiple case studies. So take note of that they are of different types of designs. Okay, and among others. All right, so research methods states the process of data collection. This is very, very important. The locale of the study. The sampling method is also very important. Basically, in qualitative research, we're using purposive sampling. But if the topic is very critical, then we use snowball sampling or bioreferral. And the following should be present also. The participants' selection criteria. Take note on that. You have to select that based, you have to provide the selection criteria for you to be able to purposely select those participants. The characteristics of the participants that will be written after you gather the data. Then the data analysis procedures. Remember that the type of designs that you use should match to the data analysis that you're going to use. For example, if we're going a descriptive phenomenology based on Husserlian phenomenological method, then you are going to use, I suggest to use Kolaichi's descriptive phenomenological method data analysis. But if you're doing case studies, for a single case study, an embedded single case study, I am suggesting to use thematic analysis, but with the support of Lincoln and Goba in terms of establishing trustworthiness. But if we are doing a multiple case studies and an embedded multiple case studies, then you are going to use thematic analysis with a cross-case analysis. All right? Now, let's proceed to establishing trustworthiness. As I've mentioned a while ago, you have to do that because it is the only way for you to be able to say that the data is uh, is trustworthy, of quality, okay, with a high level of confidence. So you can do that if you are going to establish trustworthiness via the use of the work of Lincoln and Goba. Ethical considerations. When we say ethical considerations, this includes also how you're going to protect your participants, the research locale, for example, and among others. You have to mention there, such as, for example, if your participants are underage, then you are going to use assent form. But if your participants are 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 of legal age, then you are going to use also the consent form. Make sure to use John Doe names of the participants and at the same time there is locale so that you will not be able to violate any rules or laws uh, and at the same time to protect also as well our participants and the resource locale. Finally, we have the resource reflexivity or the reflexivity part. Mean to say the position of the researcher. What is your position in your research? What are your biases in relation to your research? And you have to establish it here. You write it here. Who you are and what other things that might affect in your study. That includes from the beginning to the middle and to the end. Meaning to say, what are your biases before you conduct the study, before you gather the study, or before the collection of the data, during the analysis, and at the same time, the interpretations. Okay, so you have to establish all the possible biases and put it in the research reflexivity. Okay, for the quantitative research, the same manner of writing the research design, but in the research methods, you are also going to mention the data collection process, the local study, the sampling method, okay, the instrument that you're going to use, you have to describe it, and at the same time, the validation. How did you validate the instrument? What happened in the validation techniques? Take note that there are 4 types of doing validations. Okay, some of that is you look into the internal validity, the external validity is very, very important. The phase validation is very, very important, and make sure that it's very, very objective. Okay, then the treatment of data. How are you going to treat the data that you have collected? Okay, in other words, you mention the statistical tools that you are going to use for you to be able to process and analyze the quantitative data that you have. Justify all of this by mentioning also citing literatures uh, for you to be able to have a quality informations. Okay, and finally we have also ethical considerations, the same thing what we did in the qualitative research. All right, so how do we write our results and discussions? For qualitative research, just follow your selected data analysis. Okay, and then provide an in-depth analysis and discussions, and at the same time support it with at least 5 scientific literature to every result. And make sure to follow the parts in writing a paragraph in scientific paper. For quantitative research, you follow the following: provide analysis to every results and follow the following method of explanation. First is the descriptive analysis. What happened? If you have a table or a graph, for example, or a chart, you describe first the table and the charts and the highlights, the extreme, the extreme high, the mid, and the extreme low, for example, and make sure to connect that to the gaps that you have mentioned in the literature. All right. And then diagnostic analysis. Why did it happen? So this is a 1 paragraph discussions. Why did it happen based on the trend that you have seen in the descriptive analysis? And finally, also the predictive analytics. We have here what will happen if that phenomenon will continue. Okay, prescriptive analytic, what should be done if that particular phenomenon will continue. And these 3, diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive analytics, should be supported with at least 5 literature in relation to your discussions and your claims. Okay? Again, provide an in-depth analysis and discussion and support it with at least 5 scientific literature to every result. So, then we have here conclusions. So how do we write conclusions? Conclusions wraps up what you have been discussed in your paper. Conclusions may also call for actions or overview future possible research. So the following outline may help you conclude your paper. In a general way, restate your topic, okay, and why it is important. Restate your thesis or claim. Address opposing viewpoints and explain why readers should align with your position. Call for action or overview future research possibilities. Okay, for the references, we are going to use the APA Style 7th edition. You may use a reference tab in MS Word if APA 7th style is already present in our menu bar, or I would like to recommend the use of Mendeley to automate in formatting and arranging